The deed cost us $5. 5 actual dollars, a single bill folded in thirds that my sister Odette pulled from the zippered coin pocket of her backpack, the place she kept emergency money, and handed across a county clerk's counter in rural Georgia while the woman behind the desk looked at us with an expression caught somewhere between professional neutrality and undisguised bewilderment. We had been living out of that backpack. Out of 2 backpacks, technically, Odette's and mine, plus a rolling duffel with a broken wheel that I dragged everywhere because it held the things we weren't willing to leave behind. Between the 3 bags, we had everything that remained of 2 lives that had, inside of 8 months, come entirely apart at the seams. The diner we had just purchased sat on Georgia State Route 112, 12 miles outside of a town called Harlow that had itself seen better decades. We had driven past it the first time without stopping, then turned around 3 miles later because Odette had said, "Wait, go back," the way she says things when she already knows what she's about to decide. It had been closed for somewhere between 8 and 12 years, depending on which local account you believed. The sign, a mounted metal sign above the door reading pearls in letters that had once been red and were now the color of dried roses, had been there long enough to become part of the building, rather than an addition to it. The windows were boarded. The parking lot was reclaimed by grass growing through asphalt cracks in ways that suggested the asphalt had given up before the grass had. The county had seized it for back taxes 3 years prior. Delinquent amount, $4.70. We paid $5 and received change. What we did not know, what we could not have known. Standing at that clerk's counter in our road-worn clothes with our cumulative net worth in 2 backpacks and a lopsided duffel, was that Pearl's Diner had a basement that wasn't on any blueprint we would ever find. And the basement was not empty. My name is Calabrin Voss. I am 33 years old and I have a master's degree in social work that currently lives in a cardboard tube in the rolling duffel and has not been relevant to my daily life for approximately 7 months. My sister Odette is 36. She has a cosmetology license, a specific and highly calibrated sense of humor that functions best under pressure, and the kind of practical intelligence that doesn't come from any institution, the intelligence of someone who has spent her whole life solving problems that shouldn't exist with resources that aren't quite enough. We are not close in the way that the word close is often used, meaning, we do not call each other every day, we do not finish each other's sentences. We have had significant disagreements about significant things that were not resolved so much as set aside with the mutual understanding that the relationship mattered more than the argument. We are close in the way that people are close when they have been through the same difficult things and have chosen, repeatedly, to face the next difficult thing together rather than separately. Our mother died 3 years ago. Cancer, not fast, not kind. We took turns being with her at the end, trading weeks, both of us holding down jobs and lives that were showing the structural stress of divided attention. After she died, we held each other up in the specific way of people who have just lost the person who held them both. And then, 8 months before the diner, our lives disassembled in ways that I can only describe as simultaneous and interconnected. Like a building where removing one weight-bearing element causes the adjacent ones to follow. Odette's salon, she had been renting a chair for 6 years, building a clientele, saving toward her own space, lost its lease when the building sold to a developer. The gap between that income and her rent was not bridgeable on short notice. She asked to stay with me while she figured it out. I was already in the process of figuring something out myself. My organization, a non-profit providing housing case management services, had its primary grant funding revoked when the state budget contracted. 40% of our staff were let go in a week, including me, with 2 weeks of severance and the kind of institutional apology that is meant to absorb liability rather than provide comfort. We were both in my apartment for 6 weeks. Then my apartment became untenable when I ran out of severance and savings simultaneously, with a precision that felt almost satirical. We moved into Odette's car. I want to say this plainly because I spent the first 2 weeks of it unable to say it plainly to myself. We were homeless. 2 adult women with advanced training in fields related to the care of other people, living in a 2015 Honda CR-V in the parking lots of 24-hour establishments in suburban Georgia. managing hygiene through gym day passes and library bathrooms, eating from a small cooler we kept in the back. It lasted for months before we understood that the next move had to be something other than waiting for circumstances to improve on their own. The idea was Odette's, in the way that most of the structural ideas in our lives have been Odette's. She had been researching, in library parking lots, on her phone. With the focused intensity she brings to problems she has decided to solve, county tax delinquency auctions and abandoned property programs in rural Georgia counties. This is not an obvious solution to homelessness. But Odette has never been interested in obvious solutions, because obvious solutions are where everyone else is competing, and she prefers the terrain where she can operate without the crowd. There's a program, she told me one morning in the car, her laptop open on the passenger seat, coffee balanced on the dash. Some counties have started selling deeply delinquent properties for nominal amounts to individuals who commit to rehabilitation. The idea is that an abandoned property generating zero tax revenue is worth less than a nominal sale that gets the property back on the tax rolls. How nominal? Depends on the county. Some it's $1. Some it's a sealed bid over the delinquent tax amount. She turned the laptop toward me. This one is $4.70. I looked at the listing. Pearl's Diner. Route 112, Harlow, Georgia. Commercial property, 1,840 square feet. Counter held, back taxes owed, $4.70. Rehabilitation commitment required. Inspection waived. Sold as is. I looked at her. A diner. A building. With walls and a roof, which is more than we currently have. We don't know anything about running a diner. We're not running it yet. We're surviving in it while we figure out what to do with it. She closed the laptop with the quiet authority of someone who has already decided. The commitment is that we get it up to code within 2 years and maintain the property. That's it. We can figure out the rest. I looked at the listing photograph. A low building with a faded sign and boarded windows and a parking lot losing its war with vegetation. I thought about the CRV, which had developed a sound in the passenger door that we couldn't identify and couldn't afford to investigate. What if the roof is gone? I asked. Then we fix the roof. With what money? With whatever money we make between now and when the roof needs fixing. She looked at me. Calla. We have nothing. The risk of having nothing is nothing. We drove to Harlow the next morning. The county clerk processed our deed application with an efficiency that suggested she had done weirder things. She verified our rehabilitation commitment letter. Odette had drafted it the night before on her phone and printed it at the library, collected our $5, made change, and handed us a deed to a 1,840 square foot abandoned commercial property in rural Georgia. We sat in the car outside the courthouse for a long time without speaking. Then Odette said, we should go see what we bought. The key was at the Harlow County Building and Zoning Office. Because the county had done a basic structural assessment when they seized the property and had entered with a key rather than breaking anything, and they had retained it. A man named Terrence in Building and Zoning handed it to us with the expression of someone handing over a problem they were glad to no longer own. Roof is intact, he said. I'll say that much. Everything else, he left it to our imagination, which was generous of him. The key was a standard commercial deadbolt key, and the deadbolt worked, stiffly, with significant protest, but it turned. The door swung inward. The smell was what I registered first. Old grease. Old coffee. Old time, that particular composite smell of a space that has been sealed and left to the specific domestic archaeology of slow decomposition. Not rot, exactly. More like reduction. Everything distilling toward its essential components over years of no one opening the door. We stood in the doorway and let our eyes adjust. The diner was intact. That was the unexpected thing. I had braced, between the photograph and Terrence's expression, for something substantially worse than what we found. The booths were still there, 4 of them along the window wall, the vinyl cracked and dull but present, the table surfaces intact beneath a coat of dust so thick it had become its own texture. A counter ran the length of the space, 8 stools, the stools upright and still bolted. Behind the counter, the pass-through window to the kitchen, dark. The kitchen itself visible through the pass-through, equipment still in place, a range, a flat-top grill. A large refrigerator that would need to be assessed before anyone imagined plugging it in again. On the counter, centered and specific, a coffee mug. One mug, alone, clean, or as clean as anything in the space was clean, meaning coated in the same uniform dust as everything else, but upright, intentional. As if someone had left it in preparation for returning. Nobody had returned. We walked through carefully, assessing. Odette had her phone out, taking photographs and making voice notes, dimensions, conditions, what needed immediate attention versus what could wait. The windows were intact behind the boards. The boards had been put up from the outside, which meant the glass had survived. The roof, as Terence had said, was genuinely intact, no water damage visible on the ceiling tiles, no buckling, no evidence of moisture intrusion. The kitchen equipment was old but physically present. Disconnected, utility lines capped off, but physically there. Not stripped. Not vandalized. Someone had closed this place carefully. Someone had intended to come back. I found the name painted on the kitchen wall, above the pass-through, in letters that were still legible beneath the years, Pearl's Kitchen. Estimated 1961. Good food, honest prices, no hurry. Established 1961. Someone named Pearl had opened this diner and run it for, by our best estimate. Based on the most recent newspaper date I found in a booth seat cushion later that week, approximately 52 years. 52 years. And then she had left a coffee mug on the counter and not come back. We slept in the diner that first night, sleeping bags on the booth benches, the CRV finally parked somewhere permanent, the building's walls doing what walls do against the early September night. It was the first time in 4 months I had slept inside. I woke up at 3 a.m. to the sound of Odette's voice. Calla. Come look at this. She had found it while doing what Odette always does in new spaces, a systematic examination of every corner, every cabinet, every functional system. She had been in the kitchen with a flashlight doing a preliminary equipment assessment and had moved the standing shelving unit on the south wall to check the wall behind it for water damage. Behind the shelving unit was a door. Not a hidden door in the dramatic sense, not a panel flush with the wall, not a bookcase on a hinge. A plain wooden door, painted the same institutional green as the kitchen walls, that had been rendered functionally invisible by the shelving unit placed in front of it. The handle was a simple brass lever, and it turned freely. Behind the door, stairs going down. I looked at Odette. She looked at me. She said, flashlights, and went back to the supply bags we had organized, and returned with 2. We went down. The stairs were concrete, 12 of them, solid, no creak or movement. The space at the bottom was not the dirt floor cellar I had anticipated. It was a room. A finished room, with poured concrete walls and a concrete ceiling and a floor that had been covered in vinyl tile that had held despite the years. The ceiling was low, maybe 6.5 feet, but the space itself was substantial. Perhaps 20 by 25 feet, which was larger than I had expected, larger than made immediate sense given the footprint of the building above. Odette swept the flashlight around. The room was furnished. Not with the ghostly remnants of a storage space. Furnished, with intention, with care, with the specific organization of someone who had used this room regularly and expected to continue using it. Along the east wall, shelving units, floor to ceiling, holding canned goods. The cans were old, some labels faded to illegibility, but many still readable. Vegetables, fruits, meats, soups. Hundreds of cans, organized by category. Along the west wall, a workbench, tools hanging on a pegboard above it in the outlined arrangement of someone who returned each tool to its specific place. Beside the workbench, a filing cabinet, for drawers, unlocked. In the center, a table. For chairs. A kerosene lamp in the center of the table, a box of matches beside it. Against the north wall, 2 cots, folded and stored upright, with bedding rolled and tied beside them. And on the table, placed with the deliberate precision of something left for someone to find, a ledger. A photograph. And an envelope. Odette and I stood at the bottom of the stairs and looked at all of it in the combined illumination of 2 flashlights. This wasn't a restaurant basement, I said. No, she agreed. I walked to the table. I picked up the envelope. My name was not on it, the envelope was sealed and blank. I held it for a moment, then set it back. I opened the ledger instead. The first page, in the careful handwriting of someone who had taken penmanship seriously, Pearl's Shelter Register. 1971 to 2013. Names and dates of those who passed through. May these pages serve as witness. The ledger contained 547 names. I counted them. It took 2 hours, sitting at that table while Odette went through the filing cabinet with her phone light, and by the time I had a number I also had a partial understanding of what I was holding. Pearl's Diner had been a way station. For 52 years, a woman named Pearl Augustina Dewberry had operated a diner on Route 112 that served, on its visible surface, straightforward food to local customers and highway travelers. And beneath it, literally beneath it, in a finished basement that appeared on no county record I would later find, she had operated something else entirely. A shelter. An unofficial, undocumented, deliberate shelter for women and children in crisis. The register recorded names, dates, and brief notations, never circumstances detailed enough to identify anyone, as if Pearl had understood that these records needed to be protective even if found. 1971, March, MT, 2 children, 3 nights, continued west. 1984, June, AW, infant, 1 week, family located. 2001, October, 4 women, returned together, stayed through the winter. The notation spanned for decades. The entries never stopped, they ran all the way to 2013, the last entry dated September 14th of that year. 2 weeks after the most recent newspaper we'd found upstairs. 2 weeks before, we would later determine, Pearl Dewberry was admitted to a memory care facility in Macon at the age of 81. She hadn't abandoned her diner. She had lost the ability to return to it. The filing cabinet held the operational history of the shelter, not the names, but the logistics. Supply lists. Contacts written in code that took us time to decode, churches, medical providers, transportation networks. A map of the county with locations marked in a system Pearl had developed over years, which homes were safe, which roads were watched, which distances were walkable with children. She had built a network. Over 52 years. Inside a diner that was, from the outside, just a diner. The photograph on the table was of Pearl. We found her name later in a newspaper archive, but in this moment she was simply the woman in the photograph, perhaps 50 years old. Standing behind the diner counter with her arms folded and an expression that was the specific combination of warmth and no-nonsense that I recognized from years of working with people who run things that matter and have no interest in being recognized for it. The envelope, when I finally opened it, was not addressed to us specifically. It was addressed to whoever finds this and has the sense to understand what it was. Pearl's handwriting. Slightly shaky, the letter was dated 2012, perhaps written in anticipation of her own decline. This room kept people safe when there was nowhere else to keep them. It was never advertised and never officially acknowledged because acknowledgement would have ended it. I ask only that whoever inherits this building understand what the room was for and treat that history with the respect it is owed. The supplies are yours to use. The tools are yours. The cots are yours. The register belongs to the women whose names are in it and should never be made public. The basement has good bones. So did every woman who ever walked down those stairs. I put the letter down on the table. Odette was sitting in one of the chairs, the filing cabinet open in front of her, a contact list in her hand. Her face was doing something complicated. I understood why. We had come here homeless, broke, carrying everything in 3 bags. We had purchased, for $5, a building with a coffee mug on the counter and a half-century of extraordinary secret history in its basement. And the history was, in ways I was still processing, not entirely distinct from our own. We were 2 women who had found ourselves without shelter and had solved it through a property transfer that had no right to work as well as it did. Pearl had spent 52 years providing exactly that solution to people who needed it. She had just operated underground. The restoration took 14 months. I want to be honest about the work and the timeline, because there's a version of this story where everything happens quickly and cleanly and the transformation is dramatic. The real version was slower, harder, and more interesting. We started with the basics: utilities restored, windows deboarded, kitchen equipment assessed. An electrician in Harlow named Marcus, who had been in the county his whole life, came to give us an estimate and spent an additional 2 hours asking questions and ultimately gave us a significant discount because he had, he said, eaten more meals at Pearl's than he could count and was pleased to see the lights coming back on. Word traveled the way it travels in small rural counties, not through announcement but through the specific osmosis of a community where everyone knows the building that's been dark for a decade and notices when it isn't. People stopped, offered help, tools, knowledge. An older woman named Sistine brought us a box of Pearl's china that she had been keeping, she said, in case someone ever fixed the place back up. The china was mismatched. Intentionally, Pearl had collected pieces for decades, all different patterns, united only by being whole and clean. We put them on the shelves behind the counter and didn't replace them with anything uniform. The basement was a different conversation. We decided, jointly, without much deliberation, that the register was not ours to disclose. We photographed every page for preservation and sent the photographs to a university archivist who worked in Southern women's history, under an agreement of confidentiality that she honored without question. The original ledger went to the memory care facility where Pearl was living, so it could be with her. The facility director told us she could no longer read it, but held it in her hands and was calm. The basement itself we rebuilt carefully: new shelving, updated utilities, a proper ventilation system, the cots replaced with real beds. We installed a private entrance, separate from the kitchen stairs, accessible from the back of the property, and we registered the space, properly and officially, as an emergency transitional housing resource through the county's social services office. 6 beds. Officially documented. Legally operated. Connected to the same kind of network Pearl had built by hand over 50 years, except this version had paperwork and funding channels and a social worker, me, to manage the intake. The diner opened on a Thursday in November, 14 months after we bought it. Odette cooked. She had never run a diner kitchen, which meant she approached it with the same focused self-education she brought to everything: cookbooks, YouTube. A week spent in the kitchen of a diner in Macon whose owner, a woman named Dottie, had been friends with Pearl and cried when Odette told her what we were doing. The menu was simple. Breakfast all day. Pie on the weekends. No fryer. Odette had opinions about fryers. The prices were what they had been at Pearl's in the last year she operated, adjusted for inflation but kept as low as the margins could sustain. Because Pearl's sign had said honest prices and we weren't going to change that. On the first day, Marcus came in for breakfast and ordered eggs and didn't say much but left a tip that was larger than the bill. Sistine came and identified her china on the shelves and sat in a booth for 3 hours, drinking coffee and talking to everyone who came in. Which was more people than we had anticipated and which required 2 emergency phone calls to Odette's friend Yanelle, who agreed to come help serve on the condition of a standing Sunday breakfast invitation. Yanelle is now our 3rd employee. We live above the diner. We converted the 2nd floor, which had been Pearl's living quarters and which we had originally not expected to be livable, into 2 small apartments, one for each of us. They are not large. They are ours. The basement has had, in the 14 months since we opened, 12 residents come through. Some stayed days. Some stayed months. The work is the same work I trained for, in an institution I no longer work for, in a building a woman I never met built for the same purpose. I think about that sometimes. The thread between Pearl's work and mine, not the coincidence of it, because I've gotten past the framework of coincidence, but the continuity. The idea that a thing built with enough intention can outlast the person who built it, can survive closure and seizure and a decade of dark windows, and be found by the right people when it's time. We were the right people. Not because we were special. Because we needed it and we were paying attention. There's a photograph of Pearl on the wall of the diner now. The one from the basement, Pearl behind the counter, arms folded, the expression that is simultaneously warm and entirely serious. We had it printed and framed and hung it where she can see the room she opened in 1961. Odette says Pearl approves of what we've done with the place. I don't know if I believe in that kind of approval from that kind of distance. But I believe that the work we are doing is continuous with the work she did, and that continuity feels like something I want to honor every day. $5. We paid $5 for a building. And the building gave us shelter and purpose and a history we were not prepared for and a basement full of evidence that ordinary people doing extraordinary things quietly, without recognition, for decades, can change the shape of the world around them without anyone outside knowing. Pearl never made a headline. She never gave a speech. She made eggs and pie and kept a ledger and maintained a room beneath her kitchen for 52 years. Sometimes I stand at the counter in the morning before we open and look at her photograph and think about what it means to build something that outlasts you. Something that keeps working after you can no longer work it. Something that finds the people it was meant for. We didn't find Pearl's diner by accident. I think it found us. And I think Pearl, somewhere in a memory care facility in Macon with a ledger in her lap, would say that's exactly how she planned it.